Hi, this is Mash Rundown. If you enjoy watching movies as much as we do, subscribe and hit the like button down below.
Today we're going to be doing our movie review on Toorbos. Toorbos was based off the novel by Dalene Matthee. It was directed by Rene van Rooyen. It stars Elani Dekker and Stiaan Smith.
The plot centers around forest people in the Knysna in the 1930s, and this was one of the last groups of woodcutters, forest people. And it focused particularly on one lady, Carolina, and her journey towards actually having to eventually leave the forest and live in our more modern society. I think there were some general themes in the movie. I think one of the biggest themes that we saw was the themes of modernity versus, the old traditional rural way of living. Especially for the forest people, they're used to being free, they're not used to a lot of restrictions. And for Carolina herself, she struggles with this a lot because she moves to the town to get married, but there's all these restrictions society places on her. And what's expected of a woman, what's expected of a wife, when you can and cannot go out, versus the freedom she had in the forest to do whatever she wanted, basically whenever she wanted.
Also continuing on the nature thing, it looked at the almost nature versus progress, where the town was encroaching almost on the forest. They were trying to cut down the trees that were there already and plant new trees, foster growing trees, plant them in lines instead of as a forest would be all over the place. So it was that conflict of taking away nature and making it more progressive.
It talks a lot about function over nature, function over the old, because I do talk a lot about being progressive. You need to give up a lot of things in order to progress as society, as a civilization, as a person. I think that's one of the major conflicts in the movie.
Yeah.
Another theme is masculinity versus femininity, and I think this was portrayed in a few ways. I don't think it was such a huge theme as what maybe some other people may have thought it was. Some of the ways it was portrayed is that Carolina was very dominant and stubborn for a woman, so she had some more maybe masculine features. She also wanted to drive, she wanted to break those stereotypical expectations and norms placed on women, especially during the 1930s, which was quite nice. It was very different from what you'd expect. So in some ways she was more masculine. And then also in terms of the dynamics between men and women, so her marriage. So, women have to be subservient and obedient to the husbands, where husbands are the ones who set all the rules and lead. And so there was some dynamics of masculinity and femininity in that.
So in a lot of literature, we compare the masculine and the feminine to industrial versus nature, where like Mother Nature is feminine, where industrial is very masculine. So I think this movie also had aspects of that in looking at masculine and feminine as well.
And then another theme, and I think the last thing we'll discuss, really is the theme of love. There was a little bit of a love story in the movie. We could argue whether it was the focal point or not.
Yes.
But there definitely was a theme of, conflicting ideals as you're growing up, because Carolina is quite young. She's like 17 when the movie starts. So, finding herself, being in a relationship, while still trying to be true to herself and not lose too much to herself in her attempts to become this townswoman that her husband can be very proud of.
Yeah.
So that was quite conflicting. And I think it's actually a natural conflict. So moving on to the good.
Knysna Forest, the setting of the movie is gorgeous. The setting was amazing.
And I really liked the sounds in the movie, because you could hear animals, you could hear the wind. I was actually sitting in the cinema and it was a little bit cold, and the sounds of the wind was making me feel more cold, if that makes sense at all. That's weird, I know, but I was. It made me feel like I was there. I liked hearing the animals and stuff in the background.
As much as we could hear the animals in the background, I didn't see a single animal in that movie, which was very weird, because it's a forest. There should be a couple of birds. There should be a couple of things running around. So it must have been a choice, I imagine. Very weird. Very
I didn't notice
odd.
that there weren't animals, because I could hear the animals, so maybe for me that was enough, but for you, you definitely picked up that there wasn't any visuals,
Yes.
or none that you remember at the very least.
Yes.
I also liked how, with the sound, they carried that on right in the end, and they transitioned that last scene into the credits very well, because they actually were able to maintain the emotion that went on with the last scene and the actual feel of the whole movie right into the end, into the credits. So they never broke that feeling, which I really liked.
The actors all did a good job. Maybe a bit reserved on the performances, but we were discussing it might be a contextual choice, that, as opposed to an acting choice. Well, it would be an acting choice then, but yeah, the reservedness of
The characters.
the characters. Yeah.
I feel like they weren't too reserved, and maybe that's because I had a context in mind while watching it, because I don't think in the 1930s people would have been as out. In the 1930s you were more reserved, you were taught not to show too much emotion because it wasn't appropriate. No lady's composed. If a lady is not composed, then she's emotional and unstable, and men had to be quite hard and not show too much. So I feel like contextually it worked very well, and I felt like I was in the 1930s almost because of that choice. So for me that wasn't a problem.
So I think in general the direction, cinematography, all of that editing was done very well. There was one scene in particular I thought was fantastic. She goes from being given these strict rules to walking into a bedroom, and she takes off her top layer of clothing and she's got this lace underneath, and it, without moving from the scene, just with the camera movement, she's now put up her veil and she's getting ready for the wedding. So like these rules and the wedding almost like go hand in hand as an almost negative experience for her.
Yeah, because she's used to being so free and doing what she wants, and now suddenly there's this rule set out, and the wedding vows very much talk about, obedience for women and dominance for men. So that definitely contrasted it, even contrasted with the lace, because it's so soft and you expect the wedding day to be so beautiful, but there's this underlining unsettledness.
Even the shoes, where my feet don't grow into points, and they're so constricting the shoes. It becomes the wedding, the marriage, the laugh there becomes so constricting, like her feet are.
A little bit of foreboding.
Yes.
So now let's look at the bad.
I don't feel there was enough indication of the passage of time. The book, I know, was set over a 10-year period. The movie felt to me maybe set over a year and a half. It rushed everything almost, and I struggle to understand everybody's motivation sometimes. And if we'd been shown the progression of time, and maybe I would have had a better understanding of the motivations. I think the passage of time could definitely have been done a little bit better. There was times when I questioned people's motivations, their decisions, because there was not a lot of time spent getting to those decisions. The motivation behind the decisions.
I think that the passage of time for some people may have hindered the movie a lot because it lacked that emotional gravitas for some people. For me, it was fine. I felt that emotion, but for some people, like you're saying, with the motivations, that sometimes didn't understand the motivations because there wasn't enough time spent on showing the emotions behind the motivations.
Even when she left him, there were 2-3 scenes with them together, and they briefly mentioned other times they'd spent together, but we were shown a very brief relationship. So, yeah, I can see somebody being able to run away very easily from someone they've had 2, 3, 4 interactions with. So it wasn't, although she portrayed that it was a very difficult decision to leave, it didn't come across as a difficult decision. It was, well, why not run away? You barely know this person.
Yeah. I feel like there were instances where they did show the passage of time, but even with those instances, even though I was attuned to those, it still felt like very short. And I think it definitely would have benefited from more emphasis on the passage of time so that people could have connected with the emotions, with the motivations, and with the story a bit more.
Yeah. Also, for me, the pacing was a bit slower. Didn't necessarily think the movie had to be 2 hours long. There were times where it maybe dragged on a bit more than it really needed to.
I don't necessarily feel that, but I can understand where you're coming from with that. I think in general dramas tend to be rather slow.
Yeah.
So it's not my favourite genre to start off with.
Yes.
So I haven't read the book, but I do know that the director spoke of there being a love triangle between the husband and the forest. I don't necessarily feel like that was a love triangle. To me, that's a little bit of a weird way to put it. I think it's more that she actually did care about him, that she wanted to be with him, but there were other things that were pulling her away, just in terms of the lack of freedom, which she was so used to it. It doesn't mean that she didn't care about him and that she didn't love him. It just, there were certain things that were making it a bit more difficult. Also, the fact that the people in the forest where she grew up needed help. They were struggling. And so she really wants to go there and help out where he didn't necessarily want to do that in the way that she wanted to.
Yes.
So I feel like those were the things that kind of pulled her and pushed her. But I don't think it was a love triangle. I don't think she was in love with the forest the same way that she was in love with him.
Yeah.
You can have different priorities. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily the exact same emotion connected. So to me, love triangle is a bit strange, personally.
I'd agree with that assessment.
So our overall thoughts, for me, I enjoyed watching the movie. I'm not going to say it was my favorite movie because I do not generally enjoy dramas.
I'm not going to say I enjoyed the movie, but I'm not going to say I disliked the movie. There was a lot of growth with the characters, which was nice to see. You could watch them progress throughout the movie as they come to terms with living in a modern world, but bringing that aspect of nature with them, bringing the spirit of nature with them.
Yeah. And not losing that part of themselves.
Yeah.
Rather incorporating that within the new modern guidelines that they need to follow.
So that was done very well.
So I would score this movie a 6.5.
And I'll give it a 5.5.
So overall our score would be a 6. I think the type of people who would enjoy this movie is people who enjoy dramas. And also people who are interested in South African culture. Especially from the 1930s, in a time period where maybe a lot of people don't understand. So if you want to know a little bit more about our history that we don't often get to see portrayed in movies and soaps and those kind of things. So I think that was very interesting and I enjoyed watching it because of that.
As a South African, I did not know about the forest people. I didn't know about the Knysna relocations and that. It's interesting.
For those of you who are South African, did you know about the forest people? Let us know in the comments down below. Bye.
Later.